and here we are with our lesson Eco-Gastronomy in Action. In this lesson, we will learn how to work within the alliance between agriculture and tourism. I will start my presentation with a story that made, let's say, famously province of Foggia in the field of medicine and food. As you know, in the 19th century, many Italians have emigrated to the US. It was a massive migration, it was another period of history, another economy, another structure, but many southern Italians moved to the US to find better life conditions. So this has not been only, let's say, a chapter of the history talking about economies, but it's also a part of our history. It talks about our culture and demography. So still today, of course, there are many communities in the US based on, let's say, Italian ancestors. So the mobility in the US was very impactful and involved many of our territories, mostly in the southern Italy, and of course also the province of Foggia. And this regards not Foggia itself, but as you can see from the map, a community, a village called Roseto Valfortore, still existing today. I think today it's around 1,000 inhabitants, that moved to find better life condition in the US and built a parallel community called, with the same name at the end mostly, Roseto, Pennsylvania. So this has been a very interesting study on the cultural side, because as you can see, we have parallel communities, the original Roseto Valfortore, and then another community made of Italians coming from Roseto Valfortore, but called Roseto, Pennsylvania, as you can see, close to New York. Why Roseto, Pennsylvania became famous? Because in the 50s there was a lot of statistical studies regarding the health condition of the Americans, including, of course, all the communities. And there was some very interesting data in Roseto, Pennsylvania, that catch the attention of one of the greatest doctors of that period, the Professor Stuart Wolf. So Stuart Wolf started to study the community of Roseto because there was an unexpected data. The incidence, so the percentage of cardiovascular diseases in the people over 65 years in Roseto, Pennsylvania, was incredibly low. It was minus 50% compared to the general population. Now imagine that. If you are talking about cardiovascular disease, we are talking about the main cause of death. And if you have something that also decreases this chance by the 10%, you did a great thing. So minus 50% was enormous. And imagine under 64 years, it was even less, it was zero. So it was incredible, because we are talking about the 50s, we are talking about another life expectancy, we are talking about a period in which mostly cardiovascular disease was the main cause of death. And statistically, this cannot be random. Okay, it cannot be that you have the US with a specific percentage and then you have one little community having a complete different percentage. So this was not clearly explicable by Stuart Wolf by only reading the data, why we have this percentage and this kind of protection factor in that specific community coming from the southern Italy. What was so special in that community being in the same territory? What could possibly have caused this huge difference? That's the main question Stuart Wolf tried to answer. Maybe different dietary habits, maybe. The diet of Americans at that time was not truly the best in terms of preventing cardiovascular disease, based on the wide use of meat fat, wide use of sausages, meatballs, fried even in the lard, in the fat. So actually was super fat, was actually facilitating cardiovascular diseases. So Stuart Wolf imagined, okay, maybe Southern Italians came, as I told you in the previous lesson, with the herbs, with the transhumance, with the pastoralism, with the products of the farms and so on. They come bringing good farming habits using the natural resources of the territory. And of course, if you eat wild herbs, you have a reduced cholesterol or other fat related indicators, and of course, you prevent cardiovascular disease. That's clear, right? What's the point? Stuart Wolf implemented the research and compared the diets of the Americans in general with the diets in Roseto, Pennsylvania. And he found that Italians, the people from Roseto Valfortore, actually had the same diet of the Americans. That's the point. As I told you, it was 1880 when Italians started to move in the US. And the data found by Stuart Wolf was in the 50s of the previous century, which means that essentially it was past lots of time. And this tradition of using wild herbs was lost. Okay, essentially Italians adapted their habits to American habits, at least in terms of diet. They were very similar. And so Stuart Wolf could not explain this difference on the basis of food. There should be something else that protected Italians from cardiovascular disease. And so, maybe different professions. Job safety in the 50s in the US and in many other parts of the world was not actually the best because it was mostly mining, in the air condition that was terrible, workers' rights that was not the workers' right of today, and many other difficulties. Of course, this is also predicting, let's say, pathologies related to the respiratory area and all related with capacity of breathing and contaminants and so on. So if you think to the Italy of the 50s and before, if we talk about the province of Foggia, the professions was related to transhumance. There was a big community of shepherds. There was a big community around the economies of shepherds, the wool, the cheese product, and the meat. Okay, or related in general to farming. So Stuart Wolf made the second hypothesis, maybe Italians in that community brought their profession and live today at the open air, like shepherds, walking a lot, which is of course much better to walk in open air rather than in mines and so on. The reality also here, we had no differences. Italians after 70 years was like Americans and doing the similar actions, similar professions, so no difference. Maybe different level of alcohol consumption. Again, here I know that wine is let's say the beverage, the most common beverage in Italy, so I didn't expect it here to have less wine or less alcohol. Actually, Italians have the similar incidence of alcohol consumption, so essentially there was no difference between American and Italian, so there was no explanation under the point of view of simply dietary habits and physical activity. Same alcohol, same professions, same types of physical activity because they were all in mind, same diets, similar fats. Now, the genius is that Stuart Wolf made another hypothesis outside the classical medicine. None of this was the explanation that Italians seems to have this cardiovascular disease protection. This was not explicable by Stuart Wolf on the pure medicine side. The only difference that Stuart Wolf was not in the diets and physical activities, but was on the society. This is the genius of Stuart Wolf. Instead of studying only the medical, by excluding, let's say, the medical and the diet factors, he started to study society, and actually what was remained after the 70 years was not better food or better professions or low alcohol consumption, but it was social cohesion at the table. These are the original photos from Roseto, Pennsylvania, and that study. These are photos by the study of Stuart Wolf. As you can see, wine is everywhere, so they unluckily didn't reduce the alcohol consumption, but they were much more cohesive rather than the, let's say, the other the other participants of the study from the US. Families was more cohesive, fathers was supporting more the participants, the family members and the community in general, so the social support. Social support was higher in general. This is the observation by Stuart Wolf, and this is his explanation. Also, families was still like the big community thing that was, according to the point of view of Stuart Wolf, lost in the US. Now, this is not a way to say that you can eat all the types of fat and be happy and healthy. We are talking about another period of time where the life expectancy was low, and is an interesting input because, of course, we are talking about communities with a similar diet, but having, of course, the social cohesion that was very, very, very different. Just to show, so the most important is always medicine, well-being, diet, nutrition, but psychology can tell something on the stress reduction. Today is even obvious. You have to think to the 50s. Today we know that stress, the psychological stress, can reduce your immune system. So actually, of course, today we know. But imagine in the 50s to find this data. And this is also to say that, of course, when you promote your agritourism action, you should promote all the health-related activities. You should promote healthy cuisine. You should show that your customer in the agritourism is somebody is making self-care, is using local ingredients, is using mostly natural ingredients, is avoiding all hyper-processed food, and so on. So we propose here in our AgriTour project a systemic approach. So, systemic approach is that we have the person. The person itself can choose what to eat and what to do and what type of tourism to do between the different options. Of course, this person is inside a community. This community can promote his behaviors, can promote healthy behaviors, can actually do something at the local policy levels to promote healthy behaviors. Agritourism is one format, which is not only tourism, but is also self-care. It's also eating well, living in fresh air, living in contact with the nature, and so on. Of course, this system is not autonomous. This depends on the economy. So, for example, if you live in a country that truly promotes this action, maybe even give fiscal advantage to this kind of action, you live in a territory in which you can truly promote healthy behaviors and healthy tourism and sustainable tourism. If this is not promoted, if this is not encouraged, if this is not having any enterprise advantage, of course, it becomes more difficult to motivate people to eat well, eat healthy, make local tourism, promote local communities. Then, of course, this is not also completely autonomous because, of course, you have national, EU levels, you have global trends in the economy of food and production that, of course, can impact. So in some territories it's more difficult to promote quality food. In some territories there may be not the advances in terms of food technology. In some territories there should be maybe trends that are not truly healthy. Now, we can see a systemic approach in this by considering several sciences. I will talk mostly about social psychology and neuroscience within my expertise, but of course you can frame your agritourism concept by talking about the food technology use, by talking about laws. We have many laws in the agritourism in Italy to be respected, which are extra work, of course, for the companies, but also a way to protect the real agritourism. You can embrace also an anthropology framework to understand culture within. In our law, in the Italian law of agritourism, for example, the agritourism functions and the social agriculture functions include culture, include heritage, include even crafts, for example. Now, Europe is very active in a strategy for promoting sustainable and healthy food. In this presentation, I will show you how this could be replicated, could inspire similar strategies also in the Pacific Ocean. So Europe is very active in this. We have several frameworks we implement at all levels, also at the educational level. But yes, this could be replicated. For example, we've seen that from years and years, this from 2023, there are measures against childhood obesity. And this is simply part of a sequence of strategies to reduce nutrition, overweight, and obesity in Europe. But unluckily, some of the last Eurostat reports show the increase of obesity rate. So we are going more distant from our goals in the SDG. Again, Europe promoted the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal has the function to make Europe carbon free by 2050. Big challenge, very interesting. That operates at several levels, okay, also in terms of sustainable energy and so on, but at the core of this European Green Deal, there is the farm to fork strategy. In the Pacific Ocean, specifically in Fiji, there is the farm to table, so we have similar names and strategy to encourage this. What the farm to fork strategy is doing? Sustainable food production, so start by being sustainable, a sustainable food processing and distribution, fighting against the hyper-processed versions of food, sustainable food consumption, and food loss and waste prevention. Where is the agritourism? The agritourism is within the Italian framework sustainable food production, because the agritourism in Italy regards especially the agricultural companies. Are mainly agricultural companies doing secondary types of activities, but are essentially are producers that also offer tourism actions, that also offer accommodation, that also offer recreative actions, or even crafts, culture, and so on. But we are there. Then the agritourism is also present in the sustainable food processing and distribution, because of course the agritourism can promote the selling of their products. Can be a pasta package, can be olive oil, can be any other product. But for example, the advantage of an agritourism is that the type of souvenir that this type of tourism is offering is essentially food. So if you work very well in a sustainable packaging, in a very good promotion and so on, of course you can extend the travel experience of the traveler. The traveler is not only coming for having a nice stay in a green environment, but you can extend through this processing action. If you bring your customer, I don't know, to show how you process the food, how you pick the olives, how you process your olive oil, and so on, and you can extend this experience by telling, hey, look, we have also the offer. You can bring with you a part of your experience by buying this food. Of course, to make it sustainable, the producer can also try to sell packages of an important quantity of materials, like in the case, of course, of olive oil and similar. But again, your function within the agritourism framework can be also in the third step, which is sustainable food consumption. The sustainable food consumption is very important, because the point of agritourism is not only to sell a package of vacation to somebody, to a traveler, but also to educate them on sustainable food consumption. If I show you within my agritourism that, make an example, wild herbs and olive oil are very healthy and can be also very tasty, and have many potential benefits on health, I can have a second function within my agritourism, which is educational. I educate you in the value behind your offer. And then you can hopefully bring this together in the future and maybe change your dietary options by avoiding hyper-processed food and preferring options more sustainable. As well as, of course, in food loss and waste prevention, you can do this in two ways in the agritourism. One is to apply this as an internal procedure, and it's easier because you produce You produce a limited amount, so rarely you go into a food waste option. Sometimes even, of course, you cannot supply the 100% of your resources, so actually if you work well, you can also work very well in the food waste prevention, but also you can apply some educational activity to show how to reuse materials that the classical tourism and industry is not adopting. One classic thing we do in Italy, but think how to replicate this in Fiji, Samoa, and Vanuatu, is the use of the forgotten bread. The forgotten bread is the bread that has some days, and of course, the texture, let's say, is a little bit hard and not palatable for many. But of course, there are many ways to reuse the forgotten bread in a very, very nice way. Because of course, maybe today bread is not the most expensive item on your list, but in the past it was the most accessible, but still there was poverty, so there was lots of creative function to reuse the forgotten bread, of course by using water, by reviving this forgotten bread, and was completely natural materials. And in this way you can educate your customer to show, hey, don't throw the food, you can reuse it in this way. So they learn in an educational setting how to reuse bread and valorize it. But still, this is also having a, let's say, difficult side. Recently, there has been a protest against the European Green Deal by farmers in the EU, because of course, if you want to make very high quality food, this implies some costs by farmers to make fully organic food and so on. So there has been a discussion. So of course, this strategy is an amazing strategy, it's an ambitious strategy, and farmers should have all the means to reach this strategy, which is not always super easy. So as you can see, there are many strategies. You can find this in the European Commission website and take inspiration to inspire new policies or to inspire new strategies at the local level, of course with the needed adaptation you need in Fiji, Samoa and Vanuatu. A new consumer agenda in order to protect the consumers in Europe. Or again, we had the Green Claims Directive, which regulates how to communicate sustainability within products. What is truly sustainable, what is not. It's very articulated concept. For example, a few years ago in Europe, of course, the European Commission showed that we have a problem. Green claims, so showing that your product is sustainable, it's a strategy to advertise your product, because of course consumers want to buy products that are completely ethical as much as possible. Of course, if you say this product is green, you can encourage consumers to go there. As well as we can say the same thing for healthy claims. If you say this product is healthy, of course you encourage consumers, but this is not fully regulated. Sometimes the methodology to check if your material is truly green or not is not fully and completely regulated. So the Green Claims Directive in Europe aimed to promote equal rules for using green claims, for telling this product is sustainable. This is a study implemented in Europe that showed years ago that half of the green labels, so labels of sustainability, offer weak or non-existent verification. Or another data, 40% of the claims have no supporting evidence, so simply they told without having any proof. Or also 53% of green claims give vague, misleading or unfounded information. Again here, half of these claims cannot say false, but let's say misleading or not based on evidence, or maybe true, but nobody has the evidence. And again, the 230 sustainability labels are a lot simply. So how the consumers can understand 230 different labels and the differences is too much for the goal of a consumer that is simply to buy the food and sustain. Now, this should be replicated also if we want to extend the agritourism model in the Pacific Ocean. That's the point, because, for example, In Italy, our regulation, and in general the regulation about agritourism, shows that you have to be green, you have to be local. You can use food only from your territory. You cannot import food from another country because, of course, this would be not sustainable because it implies the transport costs and the implication on the environment. This means that if you have a regulation about agritourism and this regulation provides a fiscal advantage for the companies, but implies that the companies also have to be local, have to use their materials, have to be producers, you are also leading the category of agritourism to be fully sustainable. And if an agritourism, as it happened in Italy, instead of providing local food, imported beer from Germany to Marche region, it happened, of course, they are open to fines, to penalties, from penalties of different levels, economic levels in Italy. This means that regulation helps companies to be truly green by telling what is allowed, what is suggested, what should be. This is very important when we aim to build policies or guidelines or whatever form of quality label within a company. So it's not easy because regulating all the sustainability related labels is not easy, but still we should go in that direction. So there are many things to do, and it's a challenge because when you talk about the dietary habits influencing tourism patterns, influencing food habits, you are not talking about simple. As psychologists, we can surely tell you that it's a world how people eat and how people assume dietary habits, and there are very, very, very different levels in the food consumption styles. But I think we can do it. We can work on it. There is lots of research, and if we bridge research, policies, and practices, we can truly bring forward healthy patterns and also business idea for agritourism. We talk about this in the next lesson. Thank you very much.